It's complicated. Hello everyone, welcome back. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Madeline Jones. I'm a non-binary trans woman and I make videos about social justice issues, spirituality, and making the world a better place. If that sounds like your cup of tea, then make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. So a few months ago, a subscriber of mine DM'd me and asked me a question, which was, how, if at all, can LGBT stances on sexuality and gender coexist with Christianity? And so I did a video where I talked about sexuality, but I held off on talking about gender because it's complicated. And not just from a biblical standpoint, but also from an LGBT standpoint. There isn't just one LGBT perspective on gender. You've got people debating about whether or not you need dysphoria to be trans. You've got people who are debating about whether or not certain non-binary identities are valid. And you even have some people who are still debating whether or not trans people belong in the community. But for the sake of this video, the official LGBT standpoint that I'm going to be discussing is that people can transition from one gender to another, and that there are more than two genders. And just like last time, I'm only going to give myself 5 minutes to talk about this so I don't ramble on and on, but this is a conversation that I'd love to continue down in the comments. And with all that out of the way, let's start the timer. So you know how in the first part of this video I talked about how Jesus never said anything about homosexuality? Well, I'm gonna one-up you on that one. In this case, the Bible never says anything about trans people. Like, the whole canonical Bible. There are some Gnostic texts, like the Gospel of Thomas, that sound kind of like they're talking about transitioning. Spoiler alert, they're not talking about transitioning. But there's absolutely nothing in the 66 books of the Bible that talk about trans people, either positively or negatively. The Bible does talk about gender, kind of a lot actually. The ancient Israelites, like most other ancient societies, had very strict gender roles. But those verses don't really talk about gender, they talk about gender roles. So I want to focus on one verse, just one verse in the Bible that's actually about gender, and it completely changed my understanding of what the Bible says about gender. Genesis 1 verse 27, which says, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them." And you're probably thinking, oh yeah, I've heard that verse before, but stick with me because we're coming at it from a different angle. The most common Christian argument that I've heard against trans people is that God doesn't make mistakes. So if he made you a boy or a girl, that's what you are, end of discussion. But the question here isn't whether or not God makes mistakes. The question is, what does it mean to be a boy or a girl, a woman or a man? Personally, I think the answer can be found in this verse, and it can be uncovered by asking a simple question. Does God have a body? Because if he does, and both men and women are created in his image, then the idea that God is exclusively male kinda starts to fall apart. If all humans were created in the image of a male deity, then where do females come from? Theologian Marcus Borg put it brilliantly when he asked, how can women be in the image of God if God cannot be imaged in female form? Rather than accept the possibility of an intersex deity, which in my personal opinion is a perfectly valid interpretation of the Genesis text, most Christians will say that God is a spiritual entity, not a physical entity, and so God created both men and women in his image because God has both masculine and feminine traits. And once again, this is a perfectly sensible argument, not to mention the fact that it actually coincides with Kabbalah or Jewish mysticism. There's just one issue with this explanation, or non-issue if you ask me. If maleness and femaleness are both spiritual qualities and not physical properties, then why is it that we try to determine a person's gender based solely on their physical form? Your spiritual form may align with your physical form, as is the case for the majority, but why is it so hard to believe that there might be a mismatch of forms? And most religions, including Christianity, say that the soul is more important than the body. So when trans people say that our body doesn't match up with our soul, why is it that we so often aren't listened to? That being said, let's move on to the next part, non-binary identities. And I'm just gonna come right out and say it. God didn't just create men and women. And I'm not just talking about people who identify as something beyond male and female, I'm talking about people who biologically, physically, don't fit into the two boxes of male and female. Intersex people make up about 1% of the population, which is about the same percentage as redheads. And that's just the people who know that they're intersex. I mean, androgen insensitivity syndrome causes people with XY chromosomes to develop a biologically female body. And how many cis women, or women who think they're cis, get their chromosomes tested? And most of us know that cis men can develop a pronounced chest regardless of weight, and while gynecomastia isn't an intersex condition, how many cis men have gotten checked out to find out why their breasts are there? I'm just saying there might be more than just 1% of intersex people, and from Klinefelter syndrome to Turner syndrome to 5-alpha reductase deficiency to ambiguous genitalia, we know that biologically speaking not everyone fits into the boxes of male or female. And if the gender binary falls flat when we're talking about biological sex, it most definitely falls apart when we're talking about gender identity. So, did God not create intersex people? Did God not create non-binary people? Listen, I'm not a seminarian, at least not yet. But if there's one thing I've learned in my 23 years of living, it's that God can't be put in a box. The universe is infinite, God is infinite, and she is going to bust out of the seams of any box we put her in. So often we like to simplify things because it makes it easier for us to understand, but some things aren't meant to be simplified. For thousands of years, the dominant Western culture has taught us that all humans can fit neatly into one of two boxes. It's only recently that we've begun to realize that there are more than just two, and that we weren't meant to fit in boxes anyway, just like the God in whose image the Bible says we were created. And that's time. Like I said before, this is a complicated topic, so please comment down below and keep the conversation going. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you think it'll help someone, share it with them. And if you're still watching this video, make sure you hit the subscribe button. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video. Bye!